Welcome to the Kansas Ag Report. I'm Ken Rogers. On this week's program, we talk transportation with Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition. Also updates from Kansas Corn, Kansas Wheat, and the Kansas Farm Bureau, and our weekly comments from Kansas Livestock Association and market information from Pinion.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, Progress powered by Kansas farmers. Kansas Farm Bureau, a grassroots ag organization representing the state's farm and ranch families since 1919, kfb.org. And the Kansas Wheat Commission, lending in the adoption of profitable innovations from wheat, online at kswheat.com.
Well, in agricultural information, the U.S. economy continues to defy gravity and remains strong despite lingering inflationary pressures, higher borrowing costs, and a barrage of other headwinds. But looming risks to the economy are increasing in number and size. CoBank's Knowledge Exchange Division said the full impact of monetary policy actions like rising interest rates, quantitative easing, and contracting the money supply have yet to be felt. The policy actions, combined with depleting consumer savings, tight commercial bank lending standards, and the persistently inverted yield curve, are likely to result in a mild recession by the fourth quarter of this year, they say. Ag retailers facing a more challenging environment in the second quarter as fertilizer prices continue to fall. Now, despite an overall slowdown in inflation, ag retailers continue to face rising costs, especially for property insurance. Now, while food manufacturers generally indicate they're back to business as usual in this post-pandemic era, many consumers, though, continue to harbor a crisis management mentality regarding food costs. Well, new data from USDA's Economic Research Service shows that consumer spending on food reached a record last year. Real or inflated adjusted annual food spending in the U.S. increased steadily from 1997 through 2022, except in 08 and 09, that was during the Great Recession, and 2020 during the heart of the coronavirus. Food spending includes food at home, that described as food intended for off-premise consumption from retailers like grocery stores, and food away from home, which is described as food purchases as things like restaurants and cafeterias. Well, total food spending increased 70% from 1997 to 2022. And during this period, food at home, the spending increased at a slower rate at 53% than food away from home at 89%. Total food spending increased by an annual basis of 7.2% in 2021, 4.5% in 2022. Now, food away from home spending increased 19% in 21, 8% in 2022, drove overall by increases in food spending. And MGP Ingredients announced plans to close its industrial alcohol distillery in January of next year. The facility is in Atchison, Kansas, produces grain-neutral spirits, including industrial alcohol products and co-products. The decision to close the distillery consisted with the company's plan to address profitability headwinds associated within the sector. MGP Ingredients will continue to operate and invest in its ingredient solution business located in Atchison, including a previously announced $16.7 million texturized protein facility scheduled to be complete by the end of the year. The company will also continue to operate and invest in its Lawrenceburg, Indiana distillery operation. The company also says the increase in local corn basis costs, reducing their profitability. We'll have more coming up in a moment.
The Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by Kansas Grain Sorghum, growers working together. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org. Grass and Grain, online or in the mail, keeping Kansas farmers informed for over 60 years. grassandgrain.com.
And joining us now is Mike Steenhoek. He's Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Ken. It's good to be with you.
Always great to catch up with you. We want to talk today about a release you had out, and you've been doing a lot of things as you do on moving soybeans and other commodities around, but focusing on uh, just the situation we are with this lack of rainfall, drought, the impact it's having on movement up and down some of our river channels. What are some of the things that you're finding of the data that you've been reviewing?
Well, it's just a reminder that drought not only impedes the ability to grow a crop, it also impedes the ability to transport that crop. And we already started this year with very little moisture in the bank when it came to our soil conditions. And unfortunately, that these dry conditions have largely persisted throughout the spring and into the summer, and it's reflected in water levels on the Mississippi River and other inland waterways. We see at various spots throughout the river, we're actually lower this year than we were at this same period last year, or comparable to it, depends on the location. And when you look at just a couple of years ago, like in 2021 and 2020, we were about 20 feet higher. So that's a concern as we enter harvest season. A lot of things can happen between now and then, but does merit concern.
I know it, I think you and I talked about this even a couple of years ago. We had the challenge, getting things out of Memphis and moving some things around. It is kind of hard to believe. And we know at least parts of Western Kansas have been dealing with drought for 3 years. Finally got some moisture, but that's a long ways away from the Mississippi, even the Missouri. But Mike, talk about the challenges on the Mississippi, but we're also maybe seeing some challenges on Missouri. It's not necessarily so much moisture, maybe a little too much, or maybe just the way the whole thing is working when it comes from managing or where exactly we want to head because of all the rain and moisture that happened over the winter time with some of that snowpack.
Yeah, it really just kind of depends on how the moisture actually occurs. Like in the late winter, early spring of this year, we had significant snowfall in the Midwest. Well, largely the ground at that time behaves more like a tabletop and less like a sponge. So when the snow melts, it just disproportionately gets expedited into our streams and our rivers. So you can see elevated water levels in a very short period of time. Well, now, the ground is largely behaving like a sponge, and a very dry sponge at that. So when all this rain that's occurred recently, which is very good news, particularly for crop production, but a lot of it is getting absorbed into the ground, which clearly is beneficial to agriculture. But what that means is because the ground is behaving that way, there is not a left over to feed into our streams and our rivers. So water levels on those rivers remain depressed.
And we also know, Mike, that latest report shows that the soybean crop may not be the record one, but still going to be pretty strong here in the U.S.
Yeah, and so when we come around to our harvest season, which is our key export window, we need to have our supply chain operating at full throttle, because farmers are going to produce a lot, and we still have demand for it. Even though our export program does have a lot of headwinds right now, we need to have our supply chain up to the task. And so when we see water levels depressed like they are right now, it does merit concern.
Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, is joining us. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back with more in just a moment.
Kansas Ag Report brought to you in part by the Kansas Livestock Association, supporting members' business interests and meeting consumer demands. KLA.org. Oldie Seed Farms, carrying soil-specific seed. Find them on the web at oldieseed.com. That's OHLDE seed.com. And Kansas Corn, building the future at kansascorn.com.
And Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, is joining us. Mike, we've talked about what's going on here in kind of domestically, but also with just the drought situations. This could create some issues moving commodities through the Panama Canal.
Yeah, and we're seeing that with the canal, and the canal, for it to operate, it's all based on fresh water. Because you have a system of locks. It's not what's called a sea level canal. So you have these locks that provide a stair step up, and then you get to a high elevation level in Panama, and then a stair step down. And that's how you connect from one ocean to the next. And every time those lock chambers open up, about 50 million gallons of fresh water get expelled ultimately into the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. So you have to have sufficient moisture and precipitation to be able to allow the Panama Canal to operate. And unfortunately, they have not had adequate precipitation over the last couple of years. So they're having to limit the water depth of those ships that use the canal. And so it's just one more inhibition when it comes to our supply chain right now. And a lot of soybeans do use the Panama Canal on their journey from the Gulf to Asia.
Now, Mike, those of us in Kansas know we're a long ways away from these rivers, and the way we transport soybeans, primarily a little bit by rail, but a lot by truck. Congress, you're all working with folks in Congress to work on some of the weight limits on these trucks to make it so it's the same on whatever highway and byway you're on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the part of our surface transportation system that is created and maintained to the highest engineering standard, our interstate system, has the lowest weight allowances throughout the country. And there's a lot of states like Kansas that have higher allowances for trucks, provided that you have additional axles under that trailer to displace weight and provide more braking capacity. But yet when you go to the interstate system, weight limits are more restricted. And so there's a bill before Congress right now. It was passed out of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. It'll be before the full House. A Senate bill is expected to be introduced soon that will allow states voluntarily, they don't have to partake in this, but voluntarily allow semis loaded to 91,000 pounds with using 6 axles to operate on the interstate system within the state. We think that's a very common sense approach. We've got truck driver shortages, particularly in rural America. We want to move a lot of product at lower cost while maintaining safety and the integrity of our roads and bridges. This is a very common sense way to do it.
Mike, what's the prospects and process of this moving forward?
You know, it's always a controversial issue because, you know, the easiest thing the temptation is to think, well, heavier semis must mean more danger. It must mean more damage to our roads and bridges. But the key component of that is you have an additional axle. So going from a 5-axle semi to a 6-axle semi, when you do that, you introduce a new set of brakes so that stopping distances are actually less than a 5-axle 80,000 pound semi. You displace the weight so that the imprint on the road is actually less. And then you're reducing the number of trips to transport a given amount of freight. And that has a big impact on motor safety and infrastructure wear and tear as well. So we think there's the data, the statistics are very much on the side of this argument, but it's easy again to think in terms of where members of Congress, they don't often fully digest the things that they're voting on. That's kind of the challenge, is that kind of temptation to immediately think, well, heavier semis must mean more danger, more damage to roads and bridges.
All right, Mike, we appreciate the update on these issues. Very important. And again, look to the sky and hopefully we continue to get the moisture we need. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Ken. Good to be with you.
Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, has joined us. Stay with us. We'll have more coming up in just a moment.
Imagine having someone help you pick the best corn hybrids for every field on your farm. Your Oldie representative can combine your data with his data to offer a field-by-field prescription. Contact Oldie Seed today at 877-692-4555.
The producer-funded Kansas Wheat Innovation Center was built to get improved varieties into the hands of farmers faster. Kansas Wheat, farmers advancing their future through wheat genetics research.
What if U.S. soybean meal were more than a commodity? If seed companies and the soybean checkoff built a better variety? That future is here. The time is now. To meet end-user demands, the soybean checkoff is investing in the compositional quality of soybeans, including meal. A message from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by Kansas farmers.
Hi, my name is Rachel and I'm an agronomist at K-State, and today we're going to talk about critical growth stages of corn. So you might be wondering why we care about what's happening to a corn plant when it's only a foot tall. Well, if you look at these two ears, you can see the difference between a corn plant that was taken very good care of during the season and one that had some issues during some critical parts of its development. Which one would you want to harvest if you were a farmer? I think I'd want to harvest this one, which is why we care about all these growth stages that we're going to talk about. And the first key stage is when it first comes out of the ground. That's VE. The vegetative emergence is what that stands for. Basically, that's when that corn plant first pops out of the ground, and that's when its life starts. So at that point, we want all of the corn plants to be coming up out of the ground at the same time, because if they don't come out of the ground at the same time, some of them are older or younger, which means that during pollination, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they wouldn't be pollinating at the same time, which means you may not have enough pollen to fill those ears. When we get to V5, like this plant here, this is a V5 plant, and V5 is important because during this time, the stem in corn first comes above the ground, which is kind of strange to think about, but this plant, as a V5 plant, everything you see here is all leaves. The stem is very, very small. At V5 is when that stem starts to have its growth spurt, and the stem actually starts growing above the ground. This is important because once that stem comes above the ground, anything that damages this plant can do permanent damage to that plant when we start looking at ear development. So that's really, really important. If we come over here, we can see some other stages of corn that we're going to be looking at. This plant is V12, which, if you'll recall, means it has 12 collared leaves. At this point, the ears are really starting to develop inside of this plant. We can't see them yet, but it's already determining how many kernels are going to be on each of those ears. Between V5 and V12, nitrogen fertilizer is something that's really important. The plant starts growing a lot, and these green leaves, there's a lot of nitrogen that's in these leaves, which means fertilizer is really important during this time. After plants get to be about this big, weeds aren't as much of a concern because the leaves start taking up more of the light, which means less of it can reach the ground, and weeds aren't as competitive at that point. So this plant will continue growing until we see a tassel popping out the top and silks coming out of our ears. When we see silks coming out of our ears, we know that we've reached R1, reproductive 1, the first stage of the reproductive cycle. We can see on this tassel, actually, we have some anthers that have popped out of this corn tassel and are dropping pollen. So what happens is this pollen lands on the ear, pollination, and then it fertilizes. But if we look at these silks, if you could be here and touch these corn silks with me, you would feel that they are very moist. There's a lot of water in these corn silks. They're over 90% water, actually. So if this plant is stressed and doesn't have enough water during R1, those silks will dry out and they won't be able to do their job. So that's why at R1, farmers, if they can irrigate, might put water on, because that will help make sure that our ears have enough water to do their job effectively. And if you'll remember that ear we had before, those two ears, looking at all these different stages, we know that each of them is important because it impacts what the farmer sees at the end of the season.
The Kansas Wheat Innovation Center in Manhattan is rediscovering ways to get improved varieties and new genetics in the hands of farmers faster. Grower-led and checkoff-funded research initiatives are bringing about positive change. This grassroots leadership provides a strong voice in Topeka and Washington, D.C. Now is the time to partner with Kansas Wheat in moving wheat forward. Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Farmers investing in their future and yours. Log on to rediscoverwheat.org.
Longtime industry leader Ron Supis has traveled the world promoting Kansas wheat for more than 2 decades. This month, he embarked on a similar but distinctly different challenge, advocating for the role of wheat foods in a healthy diet to personal trainers, chefs, and more as the newly seated chairman of the Wheat Foods Council. The organization was established by wheat producers in 1972 to promote the entire category of wheat-based foods, including baked goods, cereal, crackers, pasta, sweet goods, and tortillas. Since then, the organization has established itself as a leading source of science-based information on wheat and grain foods nutrition. Ron and his wife Shirley, along with son Shane, farm in west central Kansas with wheat and sorghum making up their primary crops. Supis assumed his role as Wheat Foods Council chairman at the organization's summer board meeting in Denver this June. For wheat farmers, the difference each of these groups make is dramatic, Supis says. I've been involved with the U.S. Wheat Associates for many years and have seen firsthand the value of the work it does in international markets. I have also experienced how the Wheat Foods Council works to promote the wheat we grow. Learn more about Ron Supis and the Wheat Foods Council at www.wheatfoods.org.
Many seed companies claim to offer the latest genetics, but how many have tested those genetics in soils just like yours? The Oldie Seed Know to Grow research program has fully tested the latest seed genetics in soils that are right in your neighborhood. The Oldie Seed Know to Grow program can recommend the best performing hybrids from technologies like Enlist, Extend, and LibertyLink that will optimize the yield and profit of every acre on your farm. Contact Oldie Seed today.
Grain sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.
Rick and Sharon Hiss farm on a century farm in Barton County that includes wheat, milo, corn, oats, sorghum, CRP ground, and a cow-calf operation. They rotate crops on a regular basis to maintain good soil and practice conservation methods. In 1999, they received the Kansas Bankers Association Soil Conservation Award. Rick is a fourth-generation Farm Bureau member and has served on the Barton County Farm Bureau Board in a variety of roles, including Vice President and Treasurer, along with serving on the Scholarship and Nuisance Codes committees. Sharon has also served on the Barton County Farm Bureau Board with stints as President, Treasurer, and Women's Chair. At the state level, she served on the Promotion and Education and Women's Leadership Committees. Rick and Sharon believe Farm Bureau is the key to a strong ag system and feels all members must work together at the county, state, and national Farm Bureau levels to keep the organization strong and viable for future generations.
Imagine turning soybean oil, used cooking oils, and waste animal fats into fuel so amazing it drives U.S. jobs and our economy forward. Learn more about biodiesel at americasadvancedbiofuel.com.
The Kansas Beef Council is constantly trying to find the most effective ways to connect with consumers to build beef demand. To aid in this endeavor, KBC funds a survey once per quarter that provides insight into what Kansas and Kansas City metro area consumers are looking for when it comes to protein selections and what would entice them to eat more beef. One of the main findings this quarter was that Kansans are eating more beef than the national average. In fact, about 81% of residents eat beef at least once per week. Additionally, the report revealed the top 3 considerations for Kansans when selecting protein for meals are taste, value, and if their kids or family will enjoy eating it. Kansas City consumers also heavily consider what is a great source of protein when selecting from the meat case. With those considerations, 79% of Kansas families already enjoy beef as a protein option. Most consumers indicated a way to encourage more beef consumption is through various healthy, quick, and easy meal and recipe ideas. Kansas City residents also had an interest in different ideas on how to use ground beef and chef-inspired recipes. Other findings showed 60% of Kansans are actively using different grocery shopping apps. Also, ground beef is the most commonly purchased beef item online, with steak coming in second.
Next time you see a beautiful field of corn, reach out and thank the farmers who work tirelessly to raise corn. For livestock feed, renewable fuels, and exports to feed a growing world population. The farmers on the Kansas Corn Commission work for Kansas Corn with grower-funded checkoff dollars that support foreign and domestic market development, research, promotion, and education to expand opportunities for Kansas farmers. To learn more, visit kscorn.com.
Good morning, this is Jake McCall with Pinion Ag. We are steadily making our way into the summer growing season after a very rapid spring planting pace. Now that the majority of the crop is in the ground, all eyes will be on the weather forecast to determine this year's crop, and the market will be watching. So far, there's still a lot of ground with less moisture than would be ideal, especially in western Kansas and Nebraska. However, some relief has been found in scattered showers over the past few weeks that will attempt to replenish soil moisture where it can. Grains rallied across the board last week going into Memorial Day weekend, but from there it will largely be a weather market as we see that the U.S. is continually priced over the world market, a phenomenon demonstrated continually by poor export numbers. Cattle markets continue to march higher as we've seen an unseasonably strong cash trade for fat steers. With a large spread between northern and southern cash prices, it is likely that cattle will be trucked from south to north to fill this opportunity. In other spaces, all markets are still watching to see how the debt ceiling will be handled in D.C. While it is more than likely a deal will be reached, it is always a subject that unnerves Wall Street investors. If you have any questions or would like to discuss your marketing strategies, feel free to reach out at 888-452-8751. I'm Jake McCall with Pinion Ag, and I hope you have a safe and productive day.
Imagine turning soybean oil, used cooking oils, and waste animal fats into fuel so amazing it drives U.S. jobs and our economy forward. Learn more about biodiesel at americasadvancedbiofuel.com.
That's our show this week. Be social with us at kansasagreport.net or our social media channels. I'm Ken Rogers. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week on the Kansas Ag Report.
Kansas Corn reminds you that E15 fuel is the right choice for every kind of driver. For the car enthusiast, E15 has higher octane. For the thrifty driver, E15 is priced lower than regular unleaded. For the nature lover, E15 provides cleaner air. For the shopper who buys local, E15 has more ethanol from our Kansas corn farms. Choose E15 for a higher octane, lower price, cleaner American fuel. Message from the Kansas Corn Commission. Learn more at kscorn.com.
Sorghum is one of the most important cereal crops worldwide, and Kansas leads the nation in its production. Over the years, sorghum has been either exported, used in animal feed domestically, or for other industrial uses. Recently, its use in the ethanol market has seen tremendous growth, with 30% of domestic sorghum typically going to ethanol production. Kansas Grain Sorghum is committed to sorghum research, market development, and education. Learn more at ksgrainsorghum.org.